For every brilliant scene-stealing performance Paul Lynde delivered, there was a shadow self lurking in the wings, waiting for the curtain to fall. This darker half was not a character he played, but a demon he wrestled with every day of his adult life. It was a battle fought in public and in private, a long, slow-motion car crash fueled by insecurity, rage, and gallons of alcohol. If the secret of his sexuality was the psychological prison of his life, then alcoholism was the poison he drank within its walls. In the hard-drinking, three-martini lunch culture of mid-century Hollywood, a performer's heavy consumption was often dismissed, even romanticized. It was part of the persona, the fuel for the tortured artist or the witty raconteur. In the beginning, Paul Lynde fit neatly into this archetype. His wit seemed to get sharper, his stories more outrageous after a drink or two. He was the life of the party, the funny drunk, whose flamboyant charm was amplified by the buzz of liquor. It was a Faustian bargain, one that made him the center of attention, while quietly exacting a terrible price. But the funny drunk was a fleeting character. As the evening wore on, a chilling transformation would occur. Friends and colleagues spoke of it with a mixture of fear and sadness. The laughter would curdle into cruelty. The playful wit would sharpen into a vicious, cutting tongue, aimed with startling precision at those closest to him. The man who made millions laugh became a source of dread. Actress and friend Kay Ballard described the change as utterly terrifying, noting that his insults became deeply personal and intended to wound. Peter Marshall, his longtime host on Hollywood Squares, witnessed the Jekyll and Hyde transformation countless times, seeing his friend morph from a beloved professional into an erratic and hostile stranger. This destructive behavior inevitably spilled from private parties into the public domain, leaving a trail of humiliation and legal troubles. The arrests for public intoxication and disorderly conduct became a recurring, grim motif in his life story. Each incident chipped away at his public image and reinforced the growing perception of a man spiraling out of control. 2 episodes in the late 1970s starkly illustrate how low he had sunk. In October 1977, Lynde returned to his alma mater, Northwestern University, to serve as the Grand Marshal for the homecoming parade. It should have been a triumphant, celebratory event, a favorite son returning home. The day started with cheers and adulation, but it ended in shame. After the parade, an exhausted and heavily intoxicated Lynde entered a local fast food restaurant. There, he reportedly launched into a disruptive and offensive tirade, making racist remarks and gestures toward Dr. James P. Pitts, a respected African-American professor at the university. The incident caused outrage. In the aftermath, Lynde blamed a combination of fatigue and intoxication, but the explanation did little to quell the disappointment. It was a public display of the ugliness that alcohol could unlock within him. Just a few months later, in January 1978, trouble found him again in Salt Lake City, Utah, where he was filming a segment for the Donnie and Marie show. After someone broke into his parked car, Lynde discovered the theft and confronted police officers who were nearby investigating a separate incident. Instead of calmly reporting the crime, he became agitated and belligerent, repeatedly insisting they abandon their current work to address his problem immediately. The confrontation escalated until he was arrested and charged with interfering with a police officer. Though the charge was later dropped, the incident was yet another example of his inability to manage stress, his emotional volatility, and his poor judgment while under the influence. To understand Lynde's alcoholism is to understand it as a symptom of a deeper malady. The drinking was not just a habit, it was a desperate act of self-medication. As we explored in the previous chapter, he lived a life of profound internal conflict, forced to hide his true self from a world that would have rejected him. The pressure of maintaining that facade, the constant fear of exposure, and the deep-seated loneliness it engendered created a pain that was nearly unbearable. Alcohol was his escape. It was the only way he knew to silence the critical inner voice, to numb the ache of an unlived life, and to temporarily unleash the rage he felt at the injustice of it all. When he was drunk, the carefully constructed mask of the witty, lovable court jester crumbled. What emerged was the raw, wounded, and furious man beneath, a man lashing out at a world he felt had wronged him. His alcoholism was the tragic physical manifestation of his psychological torment. It was the slow-acting poison he consumed in a futile attempt to kill the demons that haunted him, never realizing that he was only giving them more power. It was the devastating price he paid for a lifetime of laughter that was never truly his own. In the summer of 1965, Paul Lynde was riding high. At 39, he was a bona fide star, celebrated for his Broadway success in Bye Bye Birdie and a familiar face in films and on television. He had crafted a unique and beloved persona, and his career was on a clear upward trajectory. But on a single, fog-chilled night in San Francisco, an evening of reckless indulgence would unravel into an unthinkable tragedy. One that would legally clear his name, but emotionally and reputationally haunt him for the rest of his life. The date was July 18th. Lynde was staying at the prestigious Sir Francis Drake Hotel with a friend, a handsome 24-year-old aspiring actor named James Bing Davidson. The two men, by all accounts, spent the day and evening drinking heavily, their laughter and boisterous conversation echoing through their 8th-floor hotel room. What happened next has been pieced together from police reports and Lynde's own horrified, fragmented account of the moments that followed. According to Lynde, the two were horsing around, deep in their cups and caught up in a moment of drunken, foolish play. As the story goes, Davidson, perhaps showing off, began performing a mock mountain climbing routine on the windowsill of the open window. In the space of a heartbeat, the joke turned deadly. Davidson lost his balance. He slipped, and he plunged 8 stories through the night air to his death, his body landing on the roof of the building next door. The immediate aftermath was chaos. A hysterical and devastated Paul Lynde frantically sought help. When police arrived, they found a man shattered, barely coherent with grief and shock. A formal investigation was launched, and a coroner's inquest was held to determine the cause of death. Based on the physical evidence and Lynde's testimony, the authorities reached an official conclusion. Davidson's death was a tragic accident. No foul play was suspected. Legally, Paul Lynde was in the clear. But in the court of public opinion and in the whisper networks of Hollywood, the verdict was far from settled. The official story of horsing around did little to extinguish the flames of speculation. In the deeply homophobic climate of the 1960s, the mere fact that Lynde, a man widely presumed to be gay, had been drinking in a hotel room with a handsome young actor was enough to set the gossip mill churning. The questions were salacious and sinister. Was it a lover's quarrel that had gone horribly wrong? Had there been a violent struggle? Was Lynde hiding a darker truth? There has never been any credible evidence to contradict the official ruling of an accident. But the truth mattered less than the perception. The incident became a dark, permanent stain on his reputation. It fed into a growing narrative that Lynde's life was not just flamboyant, but dangerously decadent and out of control. For the studios and network executives who employed him, he was now a known liability, a man associated with a grim and scandalous tragedy. More devastating than the damage to his career, however, was the psychological toll. Friends reported that Paul was genuinely heartbroken by Davidson's death. This was not a public relations problem to be managed. It was a profound personal trauma. He had watched a young friend die in a moment of drunken carelessness, and the weight of that memory was crushing. This event became a powerful accelerant for his alcoholism. The guilt, the grief, and the paranoia, fueled by public scrutiny, created a wound that he would try to numb with liquor for the next 2 decades. The ghost of Bing Davidson followed him everywhere. It became a source of leverage for potential blackmailers and a constant, agonizing presence in his private thoughts. If he was already living in fear of his secrets being exposed, this night solidified that fear into a lifelong paranoia. The law had absolved him, but Paul Lynde was sentenced to carry the memory of that night forever. The fall of James Davidson was the moment his private world of excess and instability violently broke through into the real world, with fatal consequences. It was the unshakable shadow, a wound that would never fully heal, and a grim reminder of the darkness that always lurked just beneath the laughter. To understand the profound sorrow of Paul Lynde, One must look beyond the stage lights and the perfectly timed zingers. One must step into the shadows of a bygone Hollywood, an industry that ran on unwritten rules, where a career lived or died by its adherence to a strict illusion of propriety. In the golden age and the decades that followed, for a man to love another man wasn't just a social taboo, it was a career death sentence. And Paul Lynde lived his entire life with that sentence hanging over his head. The context of the era is critical. Mid-century America was in the grips of the Cold War, and the Lavender Scare, a moral panic and purge of homosexuals from government positions, had bled into every corner of public life, including Hollywood. The studios, then powerful empires, held absolute control over their stars through morality clauses in their contracts. Any behavior deemed deviant or immoral was grounds for immediate termination and a permanent blacklisting. Powerful gossip columnists like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons acted as the industry's self-appointed moral police, ready to destroy a reputation with a single line of ink. In that world, being openly gay was simply not an option. For Paul Lynde, the situation was a masterpiece of irony. His comedic persona was built on a foundation of flamboyance. He was camp, effeminate, and exaggerated. On stage, he could play the sissy, and an audience would roar with laughter. It was a socially acceptable mask, a performance that allowed him to express a fraction of his true self within a safe caricature. But that mask was also a prison. It allowed him to be different, but only as the punchline to a joke. The public could embrace the mischievous Uncle Arthur, but they were not prepared to accept Paul Lynde, the man loving another man. The schism created a deep fracture in his soul. He could joke about it, but he could never truly live it. And so, like so many others, he led a double life. By day, he was the beloved television star. By night, he entered Hollywood's clandestine world, an informal network of gay actors, directors, and producers who had carved out their own safe spaces. It was a silent fraternity, a place where the masks could temporarily come off, where relationships were forged in a mutual understanding of fear and loneliness. Private parties in the Hollywood Hills, discreet bars, coded language, and knowing glances. This was the architecture of survival. Within this secret world, according to his closest confidants and his own drunken confessions, Lynde had intimate relationships with some of the biggest names of the era. These were not merely titillating rumors, they were pieces of a hidden history, stories of love and intimacy in the face of adversity. One of the most frequently mentioned names was Rock Hudson. This alleged affair, if true, was the height of Hollywood irony. Hudson was meticulously crafted by the studios into the epitome of masculinity, the romantic hero millions of women adored. Lynde, conversely, was famous for his distinct lack of machismo. They were two sides of the same oppressive coin. Their time together was reportedly in fleeting, tender moments in the early 1960s. "We laughed a lot," Lynde was quoted as saying. "There was an ease between us, like we were both wearing the same mask, and for a little while, we took it off together." For them, intimacy was not just physical. It was a shared release from the crushing weight of their public personas. Another name was Tab Hunter, the all-American beach boy, whose golden looks and charming smile were a national treasure. Hunter, who would later come out in his own autobiography, lived in constant terror of the tabloids. Lynde is said to have recounted a brief but electric summer in Malibu with Hunter, filled with sunset drives and whispered promises they both knew could never be kept. He was scared of the tabloids, Lynde once remarked. But I don't blame him. We all were. Even more surprising were the whispers of affairs with actors like Anthony Perkins, famed for his haunting portrayal of Norman Bates in Psycho. Perkins was a famously complex and emotionally guarded man, tormented by his own identity. It was said that in Lynde's unfiltered humor and levity, Perkins found a rare escape. He needed someone who could make him laugh at how ridiculous Hollywood was, Lynde allegedly quipped. And honey, nobody did ridiculous better than me. Yet, no matter how passionate, these relationships were always conducted in the shadows. They were stolen moments, secrets to be buried. The cost of this double life was immense. Lynde often lamented his deep sense of isolation, once comparing himself to an understudy in my own tragedy, always waiting in the wings, never allowed center stage. His humor, his sharpest weapon in public, was his most sophisticated defense mechanism in private. It masked a profound melancholy and a simmering rage at the injustice of it all. This struggle is inextricably linked to his alcoholism. Alcohol was the anesthetic, the only way to numb the fear of exposure and quiet the loneliness of a man who could not love openly. When he was drunk, the happy mask would fall away, revealing a man bitter and angry at the world. We were all in the same boat. He once slurred at a bar on the Sunset Strip. Only we couldn't call it the Love Boat. Ultimately, the secret Paul Lynde was forced to keep was not just a biographical detail. It is the key to understanding the man himself. It shaped his unique comedy, it fueled his personal demons, and it cemented his legacy as the tragic icon of an era that forced its most brilliant people to live a lie. His private love stories weren't just gossip. They were acts of defiance, of courage, and above all, of intimacy between men who knew the truth of their hearts could never be allowed to reach the silver screen. As the 1970s, a decade that had defined his stardom and amplified his demons, drew to a close, Paul Lynde stood at a precipice. The years of alcohol abuse, public embarrassments, and private grief had taken a profound toll. Faced with a future of diminishing health and increasing isolation, he made a conscious and determined turn toward the light. The final chapter of his life, though tragically brief, would be marked not by chaos, but by a quiet, courageous attempt at redemption. By early 1980, those close to Lynde observed a significant shift. Committing himself to a path of recovery, he became both alcohol and drug-free. The change was remarkable. The sharp, cruel edge that had come to define his intoxicated persona began to soften. The warmth and genuine wit that had always been there, buried under layers of pain, re-emerged more consistently. There was a notable improvement in his demeanor and his overall well-being. It was a difficult daily battle, but for the first time in a long time, Paul Lynde was fighting for control over his life, determined to salvage his health and career from the wreckage of his past. This period of hopeful sobriety is what made the events of January 1982 so shocking. On the night of January 10th, friends gathered to throw a birthday party for Lynde, who was about to turn 56. But as the evening wore on, the guest of honor never arrived. Concern began to mount. Paul was typically social and prompt, especially with his closest friends. One of them, actor and model Paul Baresi, grew increasingly worried. Repeated phone calls to Lynde's stately home in Beverly Hills went unanswered. Accompanied by another friend, actor Dean Dittman, Baresi drove to the house. They knocked on the door and called out his name, but the residents remained eerily silent. An unsettling stillness hung in the air. Fearing the worst, Baresi made the decision to force his way in. As he broke through a side entrance, the house immediately erupted with the piercing siren of a security alarm. It was a crucial detail. The system was fully engaged, something Lynde habitually did every single night before going to bed. The wail of the alarm cut through the silence, a chilling sign that something was terribly wrong. Baresi navigated through the house to the master bedroom. There, he found the beloved comedian lying motionless in his bed. In the early morning hours of January 11, 1982, Paul Lynde was gone. His sudden death sent shockwaves through Hollywood. In the absence of immediate facts, the tabloid media rushed to fill the vacuum with sensationalism. Lurid rumors emerged, painting a sordid picture of his final moments. They suggested he had not been alone, that a mysterious, rough-trade visitor had fled the scene, that his death was the result of a decadent night gone wrong. These fabrications were a final, cruel indignity, feeding into the homophobic stereotypes that had plagued him his entire life. The truth, however, was far quieter and more mundane. The evidence systematically dismantled the rumors. The fully engaged alarm system, which blared the moment Baresi entered, was powerful proof that no one could have left the house before his arrival. It strongly indicated that Lynde had been alone when he passed away. Furthermore, countering the lurid claims that he was found unclothed, Baresi publicly stated that Lynde was dressed for bed, wearing his pajamas and a robe. He had died not in a moment of scandal, but quietly in his sleep. The official ruling from the Los Angeles County coroner confirmed it. Paul Lynde had died of a massive heart attack, specifically a coronary thrombosis. While his years of hard living and alcohol abuse had undoubtedly contributed to his failing health, there was no indication of foul play, trauma, or recent drug use. His death was deemed natural. The final curtain had fallen. The man whose life had so often been a loud, chaotic, and public spectacle had left the world in silence and solitude. His last years were a testament to his desire to change, to confront the demons that had plagued him for decades. His death, while sudden and premature, was a peaceful one, a quiet end to a life lived at full volume.